A note before we begin. Don't forget to download the accompanying enhancement PDF containing Hitchhikers, the original synopsis, from your audiobook provider, or go to www.harpercollins.com/audio/Don't Panic.
Forward. 17 years ago, a young writer was asked to write a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy companion. Douglas Adams had agreed some years before that Titan could publish such a book, but the original writer, Richard Hollis, hadn't written it for reasons I'm still not clear on to this day, and someone at Titan had asked Kim Newman if he wanted to write it. He didn't, but, he pointed out, he knew someone who had already interviewed Douglas several times. So Nick Landau of Titan Books called me and asked if I was interested. I wanted to write this book more than anything. I said yes. Douglas Adams opened his address book to me. I talked to his colleagues and went through his filing cabinets. I read dozens of scripts and photocopied all of Douglas's press clippings. I played the Hitchhiker's computer game to the end and battled with primitive word processing programs trying to find one that would let me do footnotes. My favorite bits were interviewing Douglas, though, and the way he'd managed to be funny and serious and faintly baffled, all at the same time. You will find many of the great Hitchhiker's anecdotes in this book, although several of them, such as the tale of the thousands of people blocking the streets for the first Forbidden Planet book signing, had not yet evolved in early 1987, when the greater part of the book was written. Don't Panic has been updated and expanded twice. Now, in fact, for a third time, with Guy Adams slightly revising Chapter 30, writing Chapters 31 to 37, and updating Appendix 2. David K. Dixon wrote Chapters 24 to 26 in 1993, and in 2002, M.J. Simpson wrote Chapters 27 to 30 and overhauled the entire text. When Douglas died, I found myself being interviewed in newspapers and on the radio, Douglas's favorite medium, being asked to explain who he was and what he did and why his absence was a tragedy. Perhaps it occurs to me now, at the end of the day, one of the most magical things about Douglas's writing, as with that of his literary hero, P.G. Wodehouse, was that you knew the person writing was on your side, that he was not laughing at you, but that you were in on the joke. Back in 1987, Douglas was bemused by the existence of this book, and doubly bemused by its success. What he would make of a world in which we have not only this, but M.J. Simpson's not actually authorized, but by no means unauthorized Douglas Adams biography, Hitchhiker, and Nick Webb's forthcoming, actually officially authorized biography, Wish You Were Here, I hesitate to think. I wish he was still around. I'd send him an email and ask him, and he'd write back something serious and funny and faintly baffled, all at the same time. Neil Gaiman, July the 8th, 2003. Late.
Introduction. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is the most remarkable, certainly the most successful book ever to come out of the great publishing companies of Ursa Minor. It is about the size of a paperback book, but looks more like a large pocket calculator, having upon its face over 100 flat press buttons and a screen about 4 inches square, upon which any one of over 6 million pages can be summoned almost instantly. It comes in a durable plastic cover upon which the words, "Don't Panic," are printed in large, friendly letters. There are no known copies of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on this planet at this time. This is not its story. It is, however, the story of a book also called, at a very high level of improbability, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, of the radio series that started it all, the 6-book trilogy it comprises, the computer games, towel, and television series that it, in its turn, has spawned. To tell the story of the book, and the radio series, and the towel, it is best to tell the story of some of the minds behind it. Foremost among these is an ape-descended human from the planet Earth. Although at the time our story starts, he no more knows his destiny, which will include international travel, computers, an almost infinite number of lunches, and becoming mind-bogglingly rich, than an olive knows how to mix a pan-galactic gargle blaster. His name is Douglas Adams. He is 6 foot 5 inches tall, and he is about to have an idea. 0. The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe. The idea in question bubbled into Douglas Adams's mind quite spontaneously in a field in Innsbruck. He later denied any personal memory of it having happened, but it's the story he told, and if there can be such a thing, it's the beginning. If you have to take a flag reading "The story starts here" and stick it into the story, then there is no other place to put it. It was 1971, and the 18-year-old Douglas Adams was hitchhiking his way across Europe with a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe that he had stolen. He hadn't bothered borrowing a copy of Europe on $5 a day. He didn't have that kind of money. He was drunk. He was poverty-stricken. He was too poor to afford a room at a youth hostel. The entire story is told at length in his introduction to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a trilogy in 4 parts, in England, and The Hitchhiker's Trilogy in the US. And he wound up, at the end of a harrowing day, flat on his back in a field in Innsbruck, staring up at the stars. Somebody, he thought, somebody really ought to write a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He forgot about the idea shortly thereafter. 5 years later, while he was struggling to think of a legitimate reason for an alien to visit Earth, the phrase returned to him. The rest is history, and will be told in this book. The field in Innsbruck has since been transformed into an unremarkable section of Autobahn. Douglas Adams wrote in 1984, "When you're a student, or whatever, and you can't afford a car, or a plane fare, or even a train fare, all you can do is hope that someone will stop and pick you up. At the moment, we can't afford to go to other planets. We don't have the ships to take us there. There may be other people out there. I don't have any opinions about life out there. I just don't know. But it's nice to think that one could, even here and now, be whisked away just by hitchhiking." 1. DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid, commonly known as DNA, is the fundamental genetic building block for all living creatures. The structure of DNA was discovered and unraveled, along with its significance, in Cambridge, England in 1952, and announced to the world in March 1953. This was not the first DNA to appear in Cambridge, however. A year earlier, on the 11th of March 1952, Douglas Noel Adams was born in a former Victorian workhouse in Cambridge. His mother was a nurse, his father a postgraduate theology student who was training for holy orders, but gave it up when his friends managed to persuade him it was a terrible idea. His parents moved from Cambridge when he was 6 months old, and divorced when he was 5. At that time, Douglas was considered a little strange, possibly even retarded. He had only just learnt to talk, and "I was the only kid who anybody I knew has ever seen actually walk into a lamppost with his eyes wide open. Everybody assumed that there must be something going on inside because there sure as hell didn't seem to be anything going on the outside." Douglas was a solitary child. He had few close friends and one sister, Susan, 3 years younger than he was. In September 1959, he started at Brentwood School in Essex, where he stayed until 1970. He said of the school, "We tended to produce a lot of media trendies. Me, Griff Rhys-Jones, Noel Edmonds, Simon Bell, who wrote the novelization for Griff and Mel Smith's famous non-award-winning movie Morons from Outer Space. He's not a megastar yet, but he gives great parties. A lot of the people who designed the Amstrad computer were at Brentwood as well, but we had a very major lack of archbishops, prime ministers, and generals. He was not particularly happy at school, most of his memories having to do with basically trying to get off games. Although he was quite good at cricket and swimming, he was terrible at football and diabolically bad at rugby. The first time I ever played it, I broke my own nose on my knee. It's quite a trick, especially standing up. They could never work out at school whether I was terribly clever or terribly stupid. I always had to understand everything fully before I was prepared to say anything. He was a tall and gawky child, self-conscious of his height. My last year at prep school, we had to wear short trousers, and I was so absurdly lanky and looked so ridiculous that my mother applied for special permission for me to wear long trousers. And they said no, pointing out I was just about to go into the main school. I went to the main school and was allowed to wear long trousers, at which point we discovered they didn't have any long enough for me. So for the first term, I still had to go to school in short trousers. His ambitions at that time had more to do with the sciences than the arts. At the age when most kids wanted to be firemen, I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. I never made it because my arithmetic was too bad. I was good at maths conceptually, but lousy at arithmetic, so I didn't specialize in the sciences. If I had known what they were, I would have liked to be a software engineer, but they didn't have them then. His hobbies revolved around making model aeroplanes. I had a big display on top of a chest of drawers at home. There was a large old mirror that stood behind them, and one day the mirror fell forward and crushed the lot of them. I never made a model plane after that. I was upset, distraught for days. It was this mindless blow that fate had dealt me. Playing the guitar and reading. I didn't read as much as, looking back, I wish I had done. And not the right things either. When I have children, I'll do as much to encourage them to read as possible. You know, like hit them if they don't. I read Biggles and Captain W.E. Johns' famous science fiction series. I particularly remember a book called Quest for the Perfect Planet. A major influence, that was. There was an author called Eric Leyland, who nobody else ever seems to have heard of. He had a hero called David Flame, who was the James Bond of the 10-year-olds. But when I should have been packing in the old Dickens, I was reading Eric Leyland instead. But there you go. You can't tell kids, can you? Douglas was also an avid reader of Eagle, at that time Britain's top children's comic, and home of Dan Dare. Dan Dare, drawn by artist Frank Hampson, was a science fiction strip detailing the battle between jut-jawed space pilot Dare, his comic sidekick Digby, and the evil green Mekon. It was in Eagle that Douglas first saw print. He had 2 letters published there at the age of 11, and was paid the then enormous sum of 10 shillings each for them. The short story shows a certain precocious talent. Eagle Merry-Go-Round, Eagle and Boys World, 27th of February, 1965. Short story. London Transport Lost Property Office. This is it, said Mr. Smith, looking in at the window. As he went in, he tripped over the little step and almost crashed through the glass door. That could be dangerous. I must remember it when I go out, he muttered. Can I help you? Asked the lost property officer. Yes, I lost something on the 86 bus yesterday. Well, what was it you lost? Asked the officer. I'm afraid I can't remember, said Mr. Smith. Well, I can't help you then, said the exasperated officer. Was anything found on the bus? Asked Mr. Smith. I'm afraid not, but can you remember anything about this thing? Said the officer, desperately trying to be helpful. Yes, I can remember that it was a very bad, whatever it was. Anything else? Ah, yes, now I come to think of it, it was something like a sieve, said Mr. Smith, and he put his elbow on the highly polished counter and rested his chin on his hands. Suddenly his chin